Okay, everyone, we're going to continue our discussion through the fundamentals of adapt. And again, the goals that I had was to be able to create a course, which hopefully we've done before we had our little lunch break. Now we want to be able to create assignments or import assignments and then add questions onto that. So I'm going to presume everyone here has a blank course that they have created. Uh, you may not necessarily have mastered all the different properties associated with that course because there's a lot involved in it, but at least you've created the basic essence of the course. This is the course that I did a few hours ago, how I learned to love the cat. It is not shown for students. I can click that on there. It has no consequence for what we're doing right now because everything we're doing is instructor facing, not student facing on there. So I can click on here. And again, it's a completely empty course because it's a new course that I created and I didn't actually move anything forward with that. So just as a rehash of things, we have 5 buttons on the top here that are involved at the course level. One is the new assignment. One is the import assignment. Again, we have courses. Courses consist of assignments. Assignments consist of questions. If those questions are learning trees, then one can argue that the assignment itself is more of a orchard than it is an assignment, but it's still the same fundamental 3-level system. We have a course grade book. Of course, prop, and then we have a help for looking at insight in order to get some feedback on these things. Uh, if you are coupling your ADAPT course to your learning management course, you probably never are going to be looking at the grade book because you're just going to be using the grade book in your learning management system, so it's not there. But many people do use ADAPT outside of their learning management system, and that's the reason why we have a grade book. In fact, we have a more complex grade book infrastructure that I believe is superior to the way at least Canvas operates, because it gives us better control over things. So it's one of the reasons why I prefer to um, use it in Adapt rather than using it in my learning management system once we get access to it. And as you may remember, UC Davis hasn't completed the paperwork because it's a large institution that has lots of bureaucracy in order to get things done. And let's not get started on that that aspect. So what I did want to re-emphasize are the course properties. Uh, so each level that we have, course, assignment, or question has a series of properties associated with them. And there are a handful of different properties, again, at the course level here that you can go through. Some are not used with LMSs. For example, grades are not important because you're coupling it to your learning management system, so you don't really need to have that, or the rubric that you use for mathematics and a few other things that are connected to those there. And such. And I ended the conversation talking about the reset option, which is sort of the nuclear response in order to wipe everything clean. And we ask instructors to do that every 100 days after the class is over. And then we pester the instructors forever in terms of being able to do that. And at some point, we will step in and say it's time for us to wipe that clean, depending upon the relationship we have with the instructor or with the campus that the instructor is at. And there are reasons why you may want to have data after a year or two, studies, or some other things, as long as we're all in agreement about how we actually want to, how long we want to keep that data. Okay, so um, uh, I'm going to assume that while there are many things here that we didn't discuss, that it's fine enough for you to be able to review it on your own. If you have any specific questions associated with them, please let me know. I'm happy to go through them. I now want to add an assignment to my course. So I'm going to go back up here. Again, these are the breadcrumbs, and going up to the course itself is empty. I have the ability in order to make a new assignment or to import assignment. Let's just do the same thing that we did this morning, where instead of importing in a course, I want to import an assignment on a course. So in that case there, it's a 2-step process because I need to identify what the course is, the existing course, and it could be mine or it could be someone else's, and then which question or which assignment I want to grab from that. So for example, if I decide I want to go through all public courses, I can then choose, and let's say I want to take um, uh, American Sign Language. down in San Diego College. And then I can look through that American Sign Language course to see all the different assignments for there and say, I like to take the uh, uh, residence question assignment. I click on that. And I have the ability to bring in the property, so basically the assignment and the questions, or just the assignment without the questions embedded into it. And the reason for that is that the assignment has a lot of metadata associated with it, how you want to use it, what your late policy is, what your um, do you want it to be algorithmic? Do you want to be formative? Do you want to be a summative? And lots of other things that we're going to get into momentarily. And I may just want to replicate that rather than rebuilding that from scratch, although there's a better way in order to do that using templates that I'll be discussing a little bit later on. Uh, uh, so I may just want to have just the properties and not the questions connected to it. In this case here, I'm just going to choose the questions that are connected to it. And actually, um, I want to choose not that question, but American Sign Language 1. And then I'm going to grab short phrases. Um, this right here, that's interesting. I'm not entirely sure why the discuss it questions are actually connected to that and not the other one. But nonetheless, ignore that because there are no discuss it questions on here. This is if you had discuss it questions in the system. I'm going to import, and then it brings it in. Which is relatively quick. Again, it's has this red hue. As a reminder, the red hue means that if students were enrolled in the class, they won't be able to see this assignment, period. This is a master switch of sorts, irrespective of whether you've released it formally within the dates and times that you have that you're able to put into it. This right here has a submission status that's closed. There are right now 5 submission statuses upcoming, which means the students can't access the assignment, but they see the assignment is there, assuming you don't have that red hue turned on. Open means that they can access the assignment and they can actually submit off of it. Partial means that you have some of the students that have access to it and some do not. For example, if you have students with accommodations that may have extra time that other students do not, or you may want to select one student that needs extra time for issues like the car broke down or something like that. So you have a little bit of flexibility off of there. Close means that all the students can access the assignment, see the may or may not see the solutions depending upon if we've released it, but they're unable to submit to that. And released means that we have released all the results they're able to grab off to it. So it gives you a rough idea that even if I do this, I'm going to flip this switch to make it released. It still doesn't matter because students now they're able to see this assignment, but they're not able to submit anything to it. Let's just take a look at what's inside of that before we go into some of these other issues here. We go into it, and here are 10 questions that are part of this assignment. And that assignment has metadata or has properties associated, just like the course had properties, although they're a different set of properties. And ultimately, the complexity of the properties for the assignment are greater than for the course because people have different ways that they want to use the assignments. There's different pedagogies that are out there. None of us on here will all agree exactly what we want to use adapt for. Some may want to use it only for formative, some may want to use it for summative, some may want to have random pooling, some may not, and you have the flexibility to control that at the assignment level. These things here are all they're native questions. You can't tell that from here. It's not overly important to tell you that exactly here, other than the fact I'm able to tell it because the submission tells me that's fill in the blank. I can click on here in order to see what the question looks like as an instructor, which looks like this. But if I want to, I can flip this little switch in the upper right-hand corner to see what it looks like as a student, which I'm going to be doing right now. And so this is what the student sees. This would be ideal if it were a little bit bigger, and it's an American Sign Language problem. And basically say, how old is the woman? I don't want to say speak. I don't communicate in American Sign Language, so I presume that the woman is 34, and I could submit it. And in this case here, it's already closed, so I don't get the answer and such. Again, as I pointed out earlier on, every question has an attribution connected to it because this is an OER platform, which means that we need to follow attribution requirements, which is part of Creative Commons requirements. I'll be going over that a little bit later on this week, but I can click on here and I can see the requirement that this was created by Madeline Button. That's the title, that's the license. If I click on it, I can actually go to the license of Creative Commons. Uh, so this satisfies all the requirements for Creative Commons licensing, which is important for everything that's OER, whether it's a textbook or an interactive, or in this case here, a homework assignment. We have to fulfill our obligations for the open licensing because that is actually part of the copyright law that we need to be able to address. And such. And then I can go through this question by question off here. I'm going to switch back to instructor view um, and then and such. So I'll go over this a little bit later on when we talk about questions, but I just want to be able to give you the big picture of how this thing actually works. So I'm going to go back to the assignment. And again, 10 questions. I have the titles off of here. The first thing I'll mention is that students don't see the titles of the questions. They see question 1, question 2, question 3, question 4, etc. And that makes it convenient because if you get questions or you populate your assignment from questions from different sources, they oftentimes have different structures in how they actually name their questions. So in this case here, by wiping that clean, making it so that students always see the same structure, it's fine. You do have the ability in order to, with this little pencil, change the name of it that you want students to see. So if you want to make a consistent structure that's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, you can go about doing that. Most of the time people don't do that because it's not overly important in most cases, but I can imagine in some cases where you want the titles to be very clearly, you can put that together. Here's the adapt ID number. I mentioned before that every question has its own unique ID number because it's all in the database. And this is going to be important when we start adding questions to our assignments because it's from, while there are two mechanisms that we can use to add questions to our assignment. One is to browse with a graphical user interface and identify the question and bring it over. The easiest thing by far is, let's say, a little bit less technologically advanced, is to just copy this number and just paste it in and say, I want this question. And then that's it. It turns out that that works a lot faster and easier than having to go graphically through 300,000 questions that are out there. I will mention this is a hyphenated question, a hyphenated number here. This right, the first of this number is the assignment number. So every assignment that's created has its own assignment number. You can even see it up here in the URL if you like. And this is the question number, which means that the pair of the two tells me exactly which assignment, which is obviously connected to a specific course and connected to a specific instructor, has which question that's connected to it. Any of you can grab the same question and embed it into your assignment when we actually create it or you import it, and it will have the same number back here, but it won't have the same number there. Anytime that you see this little question mark here next to an assignment, you can click on that and it will paste it into the clipboard. So you don't actually have to write this number down or copy and paste it in some way. You just click on that. And then what you'll see when we add questions, we just basically paste it and then add it, and then it adds right there. So I'm giving away a little bit of what I'll be talking about in terms of the last step of adding questions to assignment, but it's worthwhile in order to emphasize this because there's a lot of complexity that's on the screen right now. Tell me the question type. It's a fill in the blank. How many points I have in place. If I want to, I can view the correct answer, which was 75. So I was really off here, but that's fine. I have some action items. There's a trash can. I can clone that question. Hold on a second. I'll talk about what that really means when it's talking about a question. And then I have editing interface. If I click on the editor, it'll bring up the editor for questions. The question editor is a bit complex. So I want to postpone that a little bit later on because it has multiple steps and you don't have to use everything, but it's meant in order to be flexible to handle different types of technologies because as you remember, we had 4 core technologies that are involved in ADAPT. Let me get rid of that and just comment on this thing. Now, this question right here, I'm going to edit this. I'm going to bring this up only because I need to get information. This is owned by Madeline Button. So she is the owner of question. Every question has an owner, although many questions are owned by the Commons instructor that I talked about before, this generic account that people hold into. So when you create a question, if you decide to create a question, you then are the owner. You know, and if you create the question from scratch, you're not just the owner of the question on Adapt, you're actually the intellectual property owner, which comes with lots of rights and other things. Well, the rights of anything you want to do with it, you could do. So you have full power off of that. But when I want, if I had this question and I want to edit this question, I don't have the rights to do so because it's owned by somebody else. Keep in mind that we have this community that we need to somehow figure out how to coexist in terms of sharing, but having ownership privileges off of here. You don't want to make it so that everyone can edit any questions, because if someone has a question in their course, they don't want that question to be changed while the course is going on because someone else over in a different state decides they want to change the question that's out there. So what you can do is, if you were to, I'm going to go back to the assignment here. If I were to click on this thing right here, it will duplicate and make a copy of that question that's there. Then I can take ownership of it. It still keeps references of what it used to be because that's necessary for attribution requirements for accessibility. But then, not for accessibility, but for attributions and legal reasons. But I then have ability of making ownership of that. If I'm unable to edit a question, this thing will be red, and you will see that when you bring these things in. I am using my godlike powers here, my account, which gives me the ability in order to do anything I want off here. Most of the time, you're going to see these things as red, I believe. Okay, so there were a few questions that were in a chat, but I have a feeling that they were addressed by Justin. If not, please let me know. I'm kind of giving a little scatterbrain approach in order to give the big picture before going back to the assignment.
They were just access questions. There's nothing about Adapt right now. You're good.
Right. Okay. So let's have you guys bring in an existing assignment from an existing course. Uh, just as just to get things going. So please click on the import assignment here. You can select that they are my courses. Those are only my courses I want to look at. These are all the Commons courses, those courses that are curated by the Adapt development team, or all public courses, no matter where they are, that they are put down there. The fourth one on here that you don't have access to are the private courses, which are not meant to share, so you don't even know that they exist. And you have the ability in order to go about doing that, although I encourage you to make your courses public because the sharing and caring model of OER that you're benefiting from is convenient for other people to benefit from what you've actually put together. So select something that actually works out right. I'm going to choose all public courses, and I'm going to pick elementary Italian, 401, taught in American River College. And I think that I want to add week 11 quizzes. And I'm going to import it. And now I have quite a monstrosity of a course now, switching from American Sign Language in one assignment to middle semester Italian in the next one that's down there. And it only has 2 questions that are on there. These questions are H5P, so it's a different technology, which doesn't really matter from the sake of what we're trying to do. I will mention that these American Sign Language questions were originally constructed in H5P, but the way that they actually built them in was not working very well, so we separated them all as individual questions to give us better control over things and those people who are using that. Tisha asks, is there a way to preview what we'll be importing, or do we import first and then review? It's actually best to review and parse through these courses if you can, and then bring them in. You can flip it around the other way, but then you're kind of throwing darts blindfolded. You're not entirely sure what you're going through. And that's a key component of remixing in general, because it's essentially what we're doing is remixing, which is a term that was used earlier on by Justin in the day, and I haven't used it since. And the idea of remixing is to take the corpus of content that other people have created and say, I like this, I like this, I like this, I like this, and I'm going to create something for me that I'm able to move forward. It's typically used within the context of building books or textbooks, and that's going to be a topic, I believe, on uh, Wednesday. I don't have the schedule handy right now, uh, and such, but that term can be used for anything. In this case here, when you're grabbing questions and you're bringing it all together that other people have created or organized, you are remixing of sorts in order to be able to do it. Although many people don't consider that to be, don't use that term in this context often here. Um, but when we remix for the textbooks, the first thing is to build a remixing map to basically do a survey and find out what you want and then move forward. That's not too dissimilar from how you're going about it when it's remixing of questions. Sadia asks, is it possible to have a master course template which can be shared between different instructors teaching the same course or the same instructors making changes based on semester? That's a beautiful question, Sadia. And the answer is yes, in different ways. And we will also have a more advanced thing that we were hoping was going to be released this week, but probably will be a week or two away. Uh, please hold on to that question because I want to address it after I've gone through the whole picture, because it's a specific question type on a specific assignment type that you implement called alpha and beta. It's a terminology we chose instead of master and slave because that comes with a lot of baggage that we don't want to address. So, anyways, I'm going to go back to here. So, please bring in a course from somewhere. Sorry, bring in an assignment from some other course somewhere out there, and let me have a thumbs up or a clap. I don't think there's a middle finger on Zoom, so let's not do that. Got a few thumbs. Got more. It's lighting up like a Christmas tree. A thumbs up Christmas tree, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to assume that most of us have gotten to the point that now your course has an existing assignment in there. You can parse through that. Let's take a look at what the properties are for that assignment before we start creating our own unique assignment that's not based off of other people's assignments. So just like with the courses, we have a set of properties on the side here. But like I mentioned before, those properties are different from courses. And there are a few other things off of here that are unique to specific types of assignments. We have a case study assignment that's connected to nursing, although I want to expand the scope to apply to other different fields. Uh, but let's ignore that right now. If we click on summary, we have an overview of all the metadata connected with my assignment. These are the things that we're going to be addressing when we create the assignment from scratch, including things of when it's available, who gets it, when it's available, when it's closed, if I have a final date. So if I have a two-date process, a late date and a final date, then that's implemented here. Assessment type, whether they get instant feedback or they get delayed feedback, how many attempts they can do, penalties, solutions are released, can they view the statistics, the scores, total points, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a lot of stuff in order to keep track of. And there's a way in order to go about saving this as what's called a template. This is not the same thing that Sadia was mentioned here, although actually it might be very similar to what Sadia's mentioned, depending upon the scope of what she was talking about. But you have the ability in order to save this template and then reuse it again. Now, what I didn't mention when I actually introduced Adapt was the stuff in the upper right-hand corner. Um, Now, you don't have control panel because that's associated with my account, but you have the ability to see support. If it's important for students in order to be able to see, it will be a button off of here. Students shouldn't be able to see this thing. So if I click this thing, it probably should give me an error or kick me out somewhere saying, yeah, there's an error because students are not able to see that. Um, so I'm going to click back off of here. Support will go to our support line. You can access this anywhere on the LibreVerse whenever you see a little question mark in the lower right-hand corner. And you'll see that routinely. For example, in let's take the the Academy course, you'll see it right here, which opens up the same interface that's there. So, where are we? What I wanted to emphasize more was this dashboard. So the dashboard sort of is a master set of 9 options that you will be interested in having. The top 5 are unique to me as a user. My courses, my questions, those are the questions that I own that are stored in a library. uh, my learning trees. So if I want to create learning trees, which we'll be discussing momentarily, my assignment templates, those are basically pre-made templates for making assignments. So I don't have to go through all those properties again. So if I make them and hone it for one assignment in my course, I can then use it over and over again for every other assignment in my course without having to perhaps uh, miss one or other and cause some issues that are associated with that, because there are a lot of little details associated with how these things operate. And the last one are rubric templates, and rubric templates are new. They're only 3 weeks old or so. And it gives you the ability in order to not just assign a score, but assign a score broken down into different components connected to that. That's used predominantly for open-ended grading, because auto grading is not requires a bit of sophistication to do rubric in order to be able to make that work. The final 5 down here, I should say there are 10 because this is so new. It used to be 9. So 5 up here and 5 down here. These are things that are more generic that are associated with the overall project. You could do a search through the question corpus. Again, we have about 300,000 questions. Many of them are private. So when you go to it, it'll say like 280,000 or something like that. You can browse through other people's public learning trees, which is, again, going to be a topic of discussion in more detail soon. You can go through all the public courses. So this gets back to this question in terms of, is it better to review or look at other people's courses? I can come in and say, yes, I want to look at courses. This looks slightly different for me than it does for you, but you can come in and say, I want to look at chemistry, and then I can see all the public courses in chemistry that are available. And then I can go in and take a look at them and see what I like about them and just peruse that's out there. For this one here, it only has one assignment. So this was not a terribly developed course and such. Uh, and such. So anyways, the commons are going through the courses that the commons are the people that organize it. So these are the ones that the development team has put in place off of here. So for example, if a new OpenStax books comes out with questions, we pop them in here as a corpus that you can come in and say, I want to look at the chemistry OpenStax questions. And then we can run. And the topic of bringing questions in, we take questions from a variety of different sources. We also build questions as part of both our development efforts and partners, like many of you that may be creating your own questions that are out there. We're always interested in expanding the scope and the impact of things. 300,000 questions sounds like a lot, but really we need something hundreds to 1,000 times bigger in order to be able to do what we want to do. So we're just at the infancy of being able to adapt into what we think is necessary as a central corpus for OER content. And just as a reminder, anyone who has an instructor account on the LibreVerse has access to the question uh, corpus as a question bank. Irrespective of whether they want to use it as a homework platform for their classroom, it becomes a question bank that anyone can pull into. Who doesn't have access to it? Everybody else. So if a student account comes in, they're not going to be able to have access to this thing, which is necessary for ensuring the integrity of the corpus as a homework infrastructure. And don't then ask me about how AI is going to play a role with integrity, because that right there is so messy that it's not worth discussing right now. So anyways, that's the way that we're approaching these things. So again, because everything that we host, or almost everything we host, is OER. We want to be able to distribute it as broadly as we can, subject to the limitations that we don't want students to have access to it. And frameworks, for those of you who are interested in aligning your course or your questions to specific frameworks, you can use that in order to be able to help to evaluate if the learning objectives are handled for the course or your specific skills or things like that. But that requires aligning appropriately. We are at the infancy of being able to use AI to align because it's actually fairly good for doing that sort of grunt work effort, as long as you have a well-established framework in place. And we have several frameworks in place. The one that I use is the chemistry one that the Open Learning Initiative at Carnegie Mellon uses for their chemistry, but it needs modifications to this. So you can come in and bring in any framework you want in order to be able to do it, subject to copyright issues that are connected to it. So that right there is an overview of the dashboard. I see a few things that are in the chat. So how about I address that before I get back into the assignment? Okay. Regina said that she may have missed something. Are you still, looks like Justin is addressing that. If there are any, are you still having a problem, Regina?
I think you're caught up, Domer. That's going to be during the breakout rooms.
Okay, this sounds groovy. Okay, so let's get back into where we were at. Uh, Everyone or almost everyone in here has imported a course, an assignment from a course somewhere. Now let's talk about creating an assignment from scratch. We click the new assignment button in here, and it will open up with an assignment modal. Looks very similar to the course modal, and that pops up this thing right here, but it has different questions. So you can come in a name, and I'd like you to follow through in creating a new assignment with me. And this is my cat is black and furry. Uh, just like with the course, I have public description. So that's what I would be able to do if I do a search off of here. So my cats love questions. Private descriptions, my cats hate each other. Generally. Okay. So the idea behind here is, again, what's public that people can do search for and what's private that I want to annotate. Students can see this when they're enrolled, but they don't see this right there. And again, provides an opportunity for you to have annotation with what you've created. And in case you create something and then you teach the class 2 years later and we come back and you may want to have some feedback about what an assignment is or how you may want to fix the assignment, subject to reviews that you had at the end of the course. Now, so now comes up modality. So this is summative or formative. We're using the definition of summative, meaning that it requires students to sign in order to be able to do the question. Formative means that the students don't need to sign in order to do the question. So for example, the discuss it question that was used here is set up to be formative, which means that you don't need to sign in as a student in order to be able to submit these things. This is convenient when you want to make questions embedded into your textbook that you want all students to be able to do. This is useful if you want to embed the question into your presentation quickly for people to do. You can then embed it anywhere you want. It works perfectly fine. That's out there. So when you do it formative, most of that stuff goes away because you don't have to deal with keeping track of the student and the late fees and not the late fees, but the late policies and all that stuff because it's no longer there. That's why it collapses here. But let's just keep it summative in order to make it, because that's what most of the time we're using the homework infrastructure as in order to keep track of student scores and then pass those back to learning management systems and such. Again, if I have any concerns, I can always hover over any of these question marks in order to get a little tooltip that tells me some feedback that's associated with that. If I have a template and none of you have templates yet, unless you've been playing with Adapt for a while, you have the ability in order to, after you to be able to go through this once, save it as a template, and then use it. So I've created one template that's called the delayed, no late, absolute points homework. And that's just my term for this specific type of template. If I do that, it then switches all these things into the exact way that I want that template to be used. But you don't have that. In fact, you're not even going to have this option right here because you don't have any templates there. But as soon as you do, you'll be able to pop it in. So I'm just going to switch it to nothing. Now, the way that we use Adapt oftentimes as a learning management system, learning management system light. So we have some structure in terms of here are assignments, and assignments have to go into here's a lab, and here's the weekly homework. I do lecture homework, here's this and here's that. And you can organize it in however ways you want. You can create these groups that are in place for you, and that just keeps track. Makes it easier to keep track of things, and also your students can understand what type of assignment it happens to be. This is not so important for you. You just want to keep it internal, but you have the ability in order to upload scores from external sources. Like if you kept attendance, for example, and you want to upload it into your assignment here. Now we go into scoring types. So we have two primary scoring types. I have a desire to have a third one on here. One is scoring by performance, and the other one is scoring by completion. So basically, if the student submits something, then they get a full point. And I had a third one on here, and I can't remember what that happens to be, but at some point I will hopefully remember during this meeting that I want to add on to it. I can decide to grade or assign scores or assign points to the questions in two different ways. I could do absolute, where I control every single question individually. So I say, this is 10 points, this is 20 points, this is 5 points, et cetera, et cetera. Alternatively, I could say the assignment is worth 100 points, and then it's distributed initially equally across the things, but you have the ability to change the weight of them, but you still make it so that the overall score is 100 points. That makes it convenient so that if you're having a whole bunch of homework assignments, you want them all to be 100 points or 200 points or whatever, so that students don't get a hodgepodge of different weights for different homework assignments that may be consistently every week. Definitely. If I were to switch to total assignments, I then need to emphasize how many points I want it to be. But if it's for each question, it doesn't really matter. I normally use determined by weight, determined by the assignment level. So now this is probably one of the most important things that we have to do. There are 4 types of assignments that we have. We have real-time assignments. That's assignments where the students submit and they can get an answer immediately, whether they're right or wrong. You have the ability in order to make it so you can also release the solution at that time, although you may not necessarily have to. The idea this is real time. This is great for practice, great for learning. Many of my assignments in my course are real time. Many of my assignments are also delayed. That's conventional, old school, pre-technology. The students submit their scores, and then I release the scores afterwards submit their values. It's auto-graded, but I release it at a certain date and time, and I release a solution, I release the statistics, I think there's a fourth one, I can't remember what it was. That's on there. So that right there is more of an assessment, while this right here is more of a practice-based approach. The other 2 are more advanced or unique things. One is learning tree assessments. Because a learning tree is fundamentally different in the way it operates, we actually have it so learning trees can only go into assignments that are dedicated for learning trees. Learning trees themselves are intrinsically designed to operate in real time, but they provide this additional aspects that I'll be talking about in a little bit after here. And lastly, clickers. I talked about before. Clickers also operate in a different way, because the way the clicker questions are set up is that you open up a question, students then get have a period of time, like 1 minute, in order to answer. So you need to be able to designate when you open it up and when you close, and it's a fundamentally different type of structure than the other 4. So for us, let's just pick one of these 2, but I want to be able to emphasize that you have a bit of complexity here, a bit of flexibility in terms of creating courses that can handle a range of different things. Now, this right here can submit work. Even if the question is auto-graded, we can give the option that students can actually submit their work in creating the auto-graded result. So in my chemistry class, most of my questions are auto-graded, although I do have some open-ended questions for students to submit. And I tell them that I will give them partial credit based off the work that they've done. So they have to submit the work at the time that they do the auto-graded. So I don't have them come back afterwards and say, this is what I did. These are my calculations. Go, well, I looked at what your calculations are. So right now, default is no. I can just say yes. I will mention that I have an interest in order to expand that instead of uploading a PDF or a picture. Or taking a picture with the phone, which you have the ability to do if you want to go about doing that, is to also provide the option in order to force students to introduce audio or video for their work. Basically, what I'm trying to test out, and I'm still not entirely sure how comfortable I am with this, is the option that students, after they submit their work, they have to have a half a minute description of how they actually got to their work. And the reason for that is AI. So the students are actually just throwing things in, copying it down, and they're able to go off of here. If I could force the students in order to give a 30-second overview of how they actually solved it. I did this, I did this, I did this, and I did this. Then I feel more confident that they have actually done the work, or at least they've gone through the effort of potentially internalizing the workflow that they have to repeat off of here. I'll be testing this out next year when I start teaching this winter, but I think this is one way in order to coexist with AI. Okay, this right here is a contact. Do I want to have a button so students can contact the grader? Some instructors like that. Some instructors do not like that. And I can decide on when I want them to be able to have access to contacting me, depending upon after submission, before submissions, and things like that. It's entirely up to you. If you have a hint on the question, you have the option in order to provide a hint or give them the opportunity in order to get the hint. You can even set it up so that they can get something like a 50% deduction on their performance if they look the hint, if that's the pedagogy that you want to be able to do. Most people don't do that, but it's possible. Let's just turn that off. If I have open-ended question types, I have the ability to decide how I want students to submit to that. Right now, just make it individual assessment uploads. The other ones takes too much time in order to discuss, and it's a little bit more nuanced. I can decide what my default submission type is. When I have an open-ended question, I can decide at the question level what type of submission it is. So whether it's a file or rich text or audio, and soon will be video on here because we have that in a variety of other parts of the technology, or you make it none, which means that it's either an open-ended question or it's not even meant to be a question. It's meant to be exposition of some sort. Yeah. That again is default. You can modify that at the assignment level. Okay, so now for the STEM people in here, you would probably be interested in making sure that, if possible, that the question is algorithmic, which means that every student has a different version of that question. That technology is available in only 2 of the 4 technologies that we have, the WebWork and the iMathAS technologies, because it requires some advanced coding in order to be able to do. So if you have native or H5P and you have number submissions off of there, you have tolerances, but you don't have algorithmic capabilities off of there. Just because you click algorithmic does not mean that the question that is WebWork or iMathAS is an algorithmic question. It means that if it is, it will be algorithmically set up for the students. If you don't click this thing, it will be set up so every student has the same question on there. The third option we want to have on here is a button that will make it so that you can keep it so every student has the same, but it's an original number. So if you teach it 2 different classes or 2 different terms and you want to completely switch the numbers around, but you want to make sure that every student has the same set in order for them to help and work with each other, you can go about doing that. And that's on our short list of things to do. Late policies. So now comes more complexity that's out there. You have 3 options for the late things. You can accept things late. So you could not accept things late. So you have one deadline, that's the deadline. Once that's over, then that's over. You have the ability to override that if you want, but for the sake of the student, that's that. You can accept late, but mark late, which means that it's tagged in the grade book, and it's up to you to decide what you want to do after that. And then where the complexity comes in, accept late with a deduction. So in that case there, you have one deadline, and then you say, I want a 5% deduction just once after that deadline, or I can time it up every 24 hours in order to be able to go down. What's not on here, but will be on here soon, is a floor, so it doesn't have to go all the way to zero, so you can make sure that there's like a 50%. So there's always some incentive for students to go through their work, even if it's a month afterwards. I see your question, Joy. I'll address it in one moment. I'm just about done here. This right here is only important if you're not using the LMS and you want to do the calculations on Adapt, so you can decide if if an assignment is to pull it out of the question, but pull it out of the calculations that's there. Just as an aside, when students actually see their scores off of here, we give them their performance. But if we release the statistics, it will give them information on how all the other students performed on there. Standard deviation, mean. I don't think we do min and max, but we might have that down there. But what we do that most other people or most other platforms don't do is we provide a z-score. Now, if you don't know what a z-score is, then don't worry about what I'm about to say. But a z-score tells the student their relative performance to the rest of the class. So when students ask, okay, well, I got this score, well, that score only means context based off of how everyone else performed and such like that. So you can keep things absolute and not show it, or you can keep it, you can show it there. I find it to be useful because students have a much better idea of their performance as the class evolves, because they can compare themselves to other students in the classroom. It makes it easier for them to realize that they are not at the bottom or they're not at the top and such like that. I can provide instructions to the students how to do the assignment. I probably won't move that up higher up. Random sampling. I have the ability to make a assignment that has, let's say, 20 questions in it, and then it will randomly sample n number of questions to give to the students. It's different from algorithmic, which takes the same question and varies the numbers inside of it or the order of things. This right here will say, here are 20 different questions, and I pick 3 of them that are randomly given to a student. Now, these have their uses, but you have to be careful in order to make sure each question has the same level of difficulty. So you don't have a situation where some students have harder questions than other students. That will be unfair, and that's subject to justified grievances. I use them in my labs as a pre-lab report, where I actually find various things that they were supposed to have read in the labs. Here are 25 questions, and every student gets 3 of them out there that's randomly selected, and it works reasonably well for those purposes. Yes, you can make pooled and algorithmic questions if you want to go about adding a little extra randomness to the students. Notifications. This is an indication that we'll actually send an email to the student a certain period of time before the deadline of the assignment. It's set up, I think, by default to be 24 hours. The student gets to decide what they want it to be. So if they want to be warned 3 days beforehand, they can do that. If they want to be warned 3 hours before that, they can do that if they want. 3 minutes would be a little rough in order to be able to address it. It's up to them. I don't feel it's important for us to micromanage their scheduling in that level. Now, the last one, and this is actually built to resemble Canvas, is who you assign that question to. So we assign it to everybody. That's fine. If I have multiple sections in here, and I have only one section that was 1, if you remember that I was created it, that right there will handle every student that's in that section. If I have students enrolled in here, I'm then going to be able to have each of the students there, so I can click on individual students and give them different dates and times. That's useful for accommodation purposes and such. Right now, I'll just do everybody. Because my late policy is late with a deduction, is this not? There we go. I have 3 deadlines. I have not 3 dates. I have the starting date when it's opened. I have the first date when it's late, and then I have the final date that I'm willing to accept it. If you are unfamiliar with these things, you always have a final date when you're willing to accept things. For example, if a student submits an assignment 3 days after you've submitted the grades for your class, you're not accepting it. So you actually have to have a final date that you're willing to deal with. In this case here, I can make it the next day that's out there. I can add multiple assigned tos. So if I have one for one student that requires a certain accommodation, I can have a second student, a third student, a second section. In this case here, it's everybody, but and that's such. And lastly, and I don't want to go into more detail over here, is we have an auto release system, which will give the ability in order to decide when the assignment is visible to students, when I release the scores, solutions, and statistics to students based on the deadlines over here. So in other words, I don't have to pay attention carefully about when I release the scores or the solutions or the statistics to students if I decide to go about doing so. I can set it up as this sort of pre-made algorithmically decided infrastructure that I can co-op and switch manually off of there. Let's ignore that for now, but it's actually makes life a lot easier when you have a very complicated course infrastructure. If you have only one assignment per week and that's all you're doing, it doesn't really matter that much. Okay, so I've gone through this. Hopefully you guys have followed through this thing. Uh, there is a um, there is a consult insight on here that should tell you how to go about the same thing that we talked about here. If I've done everything right, if I save here, it's not going to tell me I've done something wrong. Let's see if I'm right. I'm not right. Okay, my late deduction must be an integer, and that's because I have percent, and now I'm right. So this point, I want you guys to create an assignment, if you haven't already followed through with what we are doing here, in order to be able for us to start adding questions to that. I don't care about the specifics of the assignment. You decide what you actually feel like you want it to be, but I just need an assignment, a blank assignment in order to be able to do that. So go through that. Give me a thumbs up when you've actually gotten to the end. And I think Joy asked a question here, so I will read it and answer it. Is it possible to create a pool of similar questions to represent one student-facing question on the assignment? Are you asking if you have a question and you want to somehow algorithmically generate new questions that are similar to it, um, or I'm not sure.
I mean that, let's say I already have an existing group of 20 questions that are very similar, like, I don't know, memorize group one, named a symbol of the periodic table or something. And so I want them at random to get one of those.
Oh,
So
no.
random.
But it will be. So one of the things that what we have right now for the sampling is it samples at the assignment level. What we will put in place soon is to sample at the question level. So you can say, here are 8 questions for each of the rows, each of the columns, and basically have like, when I teach descriptive chemistry, which I hate teaching, you have your 8 rows, and then I ask the students, how does this react with water? How does this react with halogen? How does it react there? What's the origin of the name? It's just basically generic things I want them to be able to internalize, and then I can randomly select from those questions for each of the things that are out there. That right there is on our queue. At sometimes it's been near the top, other times it's been kind of the bottom. I would assume it's going to be there in a couple months. In order to be able to address that.
So at this time, I would have to do a whole assignment based on the periodic table to get the randomness I wanted, because I can't make that a piece.
So if I understand it right, at least the way that I described it, is I would have to have 8 assignments. Each assignment has all the questions associated with each column, but it's a pooled sample that each student would have that, which is a little clunky than having and they would only see one question, assuming you only have one question. If you want to have like 3 out of 20 questions or something like that, then that makes more sense in order to be able to break it up. If it's just one question, it's better to have that in the way that we're talking about in order to put it together. So, yes. Okay, so I saw a couple thumbs up. Are you guys still working through creating your assignment? I think the answer probably is yes, but your assignment's not going to be graded, so it can be in any format that you like. I won't even ask you how group 1 metals interact with water. If you've already created it, feel free in order to go up to the dashboard and do my assignment templates. And you're going to go do a new template and you do the same thing, but now you're going to save it as a template that you can then pull and use again if you like. It's good exercise while other people are building their assignment. Carl, your assignment properties are still processing?
Yeah, yes.
That sounds odd. It's just giving you a cycle and not moving forward.
It's got a blinking dot and it's saving processing.
That should be relatively quick. Do you think you can kill it and run it again?
Yep.
Thank you. And feel free to give me a few thumbs if you have done it, so I know that where we're at here. It's hard to do this when I don't see your screens. Got a few more. It's like we have about half the people who are here. So I'm going to move forward a bit with this. Answer beta. Could you please explain how to save this as a template? If you go under dashboard and there's a thing called My Assignment Templates in the upper right-hand corner, and you click on that, this right here as assignment, if you click on New Templates, that goes through these things. So I could say a template name is New Template. I can just write whatever discussion I want. And then these are the same questions that we had in creating the assignment. That's actually right here, exact same format that you're doing, but this doesn't create an assignment. It just creates a template that I can then use in order to create an assignment automatically. Again, it makes life easier and it almost guarantees that you don't mess up on a single criterion that might be important. And because each of those meta tags are actually very important for how your assignment operates. So if your student gets a different experience from one assignment for a different one, it can cause some issues for you. So I'm going to assume that we're right. If you are still delayed in creating the assignment yourself, you can always take any of the assignments that you brought in, you imported, and just basically clone it just with the properties. And that right there will create an empty assignment with all the parameters from the other one. It's not unheard of that someone creates this thing and then they use this in order to create a bunch of empty ones instead of creating the template. I tend to do that, to be honest, rather than making a template, but I bounce back and forth from time to time. So I'm going to take this one and delete it because I really don't need it. I double clicked it there. Okay, so let's go into the empty assignment. Here's the empty assignment. And I have a handful of different things that are connected to here. Most of them are relatively straightforward. I think I went through a few of them that are on there. The two things that are particularly important are not these things, but there are the grading ones. It's the lower four. So one is the assignment gradebook and the course gradebook. So at this point here, you may be wondering, why are there two gradebooks? And the reason for that is that we have an assignment gradebook, which consists of a two-dimensional sheet that shows students on one side and assignment on the top and tells you the performance at the assignment level. But I want to know the performance at the question level. So every assignment has an assignment gradebook that tells students on one side and questions on the top. And if I come into the assignment gradebook and change one specific student's performance on one question, which is typically what happens, it will then propagate it to the assignment level. And if it's coupled to your LMS, it will propagate it to your LMS that's out there. That makes it convenient for you to actually have proper statistics at the question level of how students are performing and what you need to do in order to modify it, in order to make modify your pedagogy in order to be able to address whatever feedback that's out there. Canvas doesn't have that, but they do kind of have it in the analytics in some dug upon way. But this is why I tend to favor using Adapt instead of Canvas, the LMS that my campuses uses, because of this greater control over things. But it requires, again, multiple spreadsheets. You can envision it would require a three-dimensional gradebook in order to be able to have this together, but that's difficult to visualize. So we just have it as a series of two-dimensional sheets. But these are the two ones that are a little bit awkward off of here. Before we actually add a question on here, I just want to talk about grading of questions. So questions can be made auto-graded, or they can be made open-ended grading. Open-ended grading means it requires a grader in order to grade, a manual person in order to be able to put it in place. And that's what the open grader is putting together. Most LMSs have something like this. Canvas calls it Easy Grader, Quick Grader, something like that. Speed Grader, I think that's what it's called. Yeah. But we have something like that. Now, I'm going to switch over to one of my classes. I'm doing this off screen because I want to make sure that I don't do it. And I have a special mode that's called FERPA mode. Basically, it makes it so that all the names are not there, so I can actually show it to you without having violations of FERPA. And I'm just grabbing this here, and I just want to make sure it's turned on off screen before I actually flip it on. It is on here, so I'm going to move this thing back. So all these names are fake. And email addresses. So just in case you get concerned that I am showing something I shouldn't be showing publicly, that's out there. So I have in this class 19 students. It's a relatively small class for my load here. And this is question one. It's an auto-grade question. It doesn't really matter. Open grader lets me go through it, and I can come in and I can just go through and see their performances. These kings here, see the scores that we put in place. And this right here is an open-ended grading. I was wrong. So I can see what the student submitted down here. And go through it this way. So it's a lot easier to make this open-ended than to make it computational. You can do it computationally because it gets a little fragile and such. I can then go to the next question, and hopefully I want something that's a little bit more algorithmic. Still not right. Many of these things are tough go. So here is an algorithmic or mathematical based questions. It's probably algorithmic in place. And every student will get a different question. So if I actually cycle through here, they have different numbers. Where we're here, 25 degrees. Well, that doesn't matter. That's actually, this is not algorithmic at all. This right here. Okay, so these numbers are, okay, so it's not algorithmic. I'm sorry, grabbed the wrong question randomly. But I can imagine changing this number and this number, and then all these numbers will differ for every single student. And by cycling through here, I can then go in and see what this one specific student saw, because you need to have some way in order to be able to evaluate that, and then to provide some feedback that's in place here if necessary in order to be able to do it. And basically they got, I don't know what they did. They did something weird. That's there. So this is the open grader. And it's very convenient when you're doing this for open-ended grading, because you can just cycle through with the arrows going da 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 and write the feedback right there, or introduce rubric, which Christina Moon mentioned before. The other thing is more powerful, which you probably have not seen before because it doesn't really exist. Am I using, okay. It doesn't really exist in other systems. And that is the regrader. And I don't have that set up in the with FERPA, so I can't show it to you using existing values. The regrader gives you fine control over regrading the student's performance based off their scores. So if you want to say every student, you write a question and then you say, okay, well, if they got a negative result, that might be correct too, and you need to fix this. Instead of going through every student and fixing it, you can say all the ones that have negative something something then gets this score. So it's an ability in order to do slice and dice at the submission level, which is a bit complicated in order to be able to do. And but it's an exceedingly powerful tool in order to be able to pop in place. And there are a few things that we want to be able to advance on that. But the reality is that when you build a question, many times that question is not as good as you think it is, and you need to be able to revamp it. And instead of throwing the question away, you want to be able to say, well, I'm going to give scores based off of this and this and different interpretations and things like that. And the regrader is very useful for that. Okay. I'm going to leave it at that. I want to get back into the goal that I have, which is to add questions to this empty assignment. And we all hopefully have an empty assignment now. If you don't, please let me know, or you can review this video because we have another 15 minutes or so before we get into the breakout rooms. And hopefully I can show you a little bit of the learning trees, but otherwise we can talk about the learning trees in the breakout room. So I want to add questions to my assignment. I have two buttons up here. One says add questions, which is obvious, and one is new questions if I want to create a new question. I don't want to talk about making new questions because that right there comes with lots of baggage that's beyond what we want to do. I want to add a question. So if I click on this button here, I can add questions in one of two ways. One is by parsing through the question bank. This is actually the same view if you were to come in and say view search questions right here. So you can come in and say, I want to do a search through all public courses, and I want to find a course. And here are the questions that are in that course based off the assignments there. Yeah. And I can come in, I can just do a plus off of here. Now this can be unwieldy because you have to parse through in order to be able to find what we do. What I prefer to do is something different. I should also mention if I can do a search question here and then go through and identify things like chemistry, if I ever have the title have the word chemistry in a title, which is oftentimes not the case. So I can say there are 2,000 questions in our database that have the word chemistry in the title. There are many more questions that deal with chemistry. They just don't have the word chemistry in the title. And we're working on ways in order to be able to use AI to help better align questions to frameworks that we can actually then evaluate them. But what I actually care about more is the ability in order to not parse through and delve through it, because it's not my preference, is to actually just add by direct import. If I click direct import and I just paste in the ID number, it will paste it in. For example, I know question number 1 is Christina Moon's questions that she talked about before. If I import that question right there, I can go back and say, here is Christina Moon's Spanish class question. It's based on H5P. It's in my assignment 139713. Who cares? It's question number 1, and there you go. Now, this is how I like to go about doing things. I tend to actually come in to, and I do this on 2 different screens because I think it's most convenient, or 2 different tabs. I bring in a course of questions that I feel that I like a lot, that I'm going to be parsing through it. So let's say I bring in OpenStax questions. Now, I'm lying here by saying that I like them because in chemistry, they're actually not very good, but we have gone through them and built good solutions and made the algorithm. We've been spending years in order to make their question bank into something that's actually quite usable. So I'm going to come in and bring in OpenStax questions, and I'm bringing in the whole course. And this just makes it easy for me to be able to parse through it instead of dragging it and looking at it in the Commons area. It's going to take a moment because there are 1,700 questions here, cut up into 20, I think, assignments, and each assignment has approximately 100 questions. So here are all the questions. Okay, so I'm going to open up this in a new tab, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to basically go through assignment level. Like, let's say I'm taking equilibrium. So showing equilibrium questions before. I can go through here and say, I like these questions. I can parse through it, in this case here, and see the questions. This is in an accordion manner, and say, okay, do I like this question? No. Do I like this question? Yeah. Do I like this question? No. Do I like this question? Yes. So if I like this question, I want to add it to my assignment. I just come in and I just copy this. I go to my assignment that I'm at, and I just add the question, direct by import, and I paste. And that's it. And there it is. I can come in, and I don't have to do this at an individual level. If I want to, I can actually grab all the questions in this whole assignment, which is going to be a lot. So my students would really hate me if this was an assignment for them. I can come in and I can add them all there, and it just brings them all in. And you notice this is just the number side, not the actual assignment side. Comes through it, and because it's 106 questions, it will take a few moments in order to be able to do it, and I can bring it in. I have the ability in order to then go through and see other people's questions and pick and choose which ones I like, and copy and paste them and move it forward. It makes it easier that if you have working with somebody, you can have someone send you an email, look at question 18285. I think this is a good question off of that. And you send it to them, and you can look back and take a look at it and say, yeah, I like this. No, I don't. And you customize it however you want, and you're ready to rock. I feel this is more convenient because it's easy for me to be able to keep track of them and moving around instead of kind of digging around in order to be able to find what we are doing. So now I've brought them all in. I go to my cat is black and furry assignment, and I have lots of assignments. Lots of questions in the assignment. But of course, I can come in and delete them. You'll notice that each question is worth 0.9434 points because the total number of points for this assignment is 100 points. I put in approximately 100 different questions, so it's approximately 1 point per question to do. I can view the solutions. These are the solutions that, by and large, we have created. My team and I have been putting these together for a long time, and many times they're very detailed. Some of them are not as detailed as I may want them to be, but we have gone through in order to be able to build something far more powerful than what the original source, in this case here, OpenStax, had in their question bank. And we are constantly advancing this. For example, in the new organic chemistry questions, we are constantly updating them and making them more powerful because OChem has its own unique infrastructure that general chemistry doesn't have. So what I would like you to do is to add at least one question, preferred 3 questions, into that assignment that you put together. I don't care where you find that assignment, those questions. You can bring in the questions that you brought in here, that you brought in your initial assignment, and say, okay, I'm going to copy this one, and then just add it to your assignment. You can then and paste it there. You can go through and do a search and identify something like Spanish, if that's in the title, and say, well, there are 23 words that have the word Spanish in it. There are a lot more 23 questions, a lot more questions than that. They just don't have the word Spanish in the title. So I did it through tags, and now there's 7,500 questions that are in the tags that's out there. If I know the author, I can type in the author in order to be able to do that. Or if I even know the ID number, I can paste it in here, like 1, and it will show you the question that was number 1. Which was the one that I added here that Christina Moon and her team put together. So your task is to find 3 questions that I don't even care if you like them, just 3 questions that you've added into your assignment. So you can show that you're able to add it through. Feel free in order to find them either by searching or by browsing. I prefer browsing, but both are very powerful approaches in order to be able to populate that. While you're doing that, I can answer some questions that are in the chat. So Sadia asked, is that how you create and save them as reusable question banks? So the idea of a question bank is a little peculiar here because everything is one big question bank, and you create assignments in questions, and that by itself can be used as question banks that you are able to peruse. That's my preference, but you have the ability in order to create your own question banks outside of courses. If you go to My Questions, this right here gives you access to content that's your questions that you've created, and you can organize those into folders, or you can actually create your favorites. So you can come in and you can build your own question bank if you want of favorites that says, okay, these are ones I like for this topic. These are the ones I like for this topic. These are the ones I like for this topic, and do that. That hasn't called to me as a mechanism that I like to move forward with, but not everybody follows the same approach that I do. If this actually works for you, you can go about doing that, which is convenient. So as you're walking through and you look at questions, if you see a little heart next to it, it's not because we love you, of course we do, but it's because you have the ability to favoritize it, just sort of like how Twitter was, because I'm never going to call it anything else. And when I looked at the question here, I have a little heart right there. So if I click on that, I can I want to save that in a new folder, which is my heart folder, whatever. And this right here is my collection of favorites. And it's convenient if you're just moving along and say, okay, I like this one. I want to favoritize it, just like if you were bookmarking it in any social media infrastructure. And we just chose the heart because I think that's what Twitter still uses. I'm not sure of that and such. So have people added questions to your assignments? Joy's the most active, so I'm not sure if she's representative of everybody though. I got a few thumbs up. Okay, so that is 75% of adapting. Building a course, building assignments that you like, finding questions that you like to populate those assignments. The other 25% deals with, okay, how are you going to be using the question? How do you use the regrader, the open-ended grader? If you need to make questions, then that can oftentimes take more effort. Let me rephrase that. The 75% number I said is under the assumption that you're not creating questions. If you are in the business of creating questions, and I don't mean native questions or H5P, which is graphical and relatively simple in order. I'm talking about the algorithmic questions that deals with significant figures and variability and a whole lot of other things, and partial credit and tolerances and lots of things like that. That requires a lot of effort that you buy into, that you have to invest in order to be able to do that. Not everybody is able to do that. Fortunately, it's not important for you to be able to do that if you just have the questions that you need, that you want to be able to move forward with that. So if you're in the business of creating your own questions, there's a lot more involved in this, and that's beyond what we have set aside for this, both today and the rest of this week off here. But we're happy in order to be able to address that as people come. So we have 5 minutes left. We probably do need a break. Let me mention something briefly, and then we'll take maybe a 10-minute break before we start with the breakout rooms, unless Justin overrides me. And that is the topic of the learning trees. So if you go under dashboards and you browse learning trees, you're going to go into what learning trees are. Now, learning trees are, instead of giving a single question, you're giving a branched infrastructure in order to be able to address it. So let's say we took this question right here. So this tree right here, significant figure calculations. And the idea behind here is it's formulated in this 4-step process or 4-level process. This right here is the question that the student gets. This is algorithmic. It varies a little bit here and there, and the student has to perform. This right here is ideally done with a complicated question in place in order to be able to do that. So the conventional way of doing this thing is you submit the numbers. If you're right or wrong, you get the solution, you read the solution, and you're ready to rock. The learning tree approach is that you get this question wrong, you have the opportunity in order to get a do-over for the question. So that's the carrot. And the student, by going into the learning tree, which consists of multiple nodes that either give you exposition to teach or assessment nodes, which are meant to evaluate specific skills or subparts of that question. So we dissect it out into the individual components necessary in order to be able to. It's basically what a tutor would do by looking and seeing what do you know and what you don't know. So this is a traditional or canonical learning tree. Everything that's red is an exposition. The goal is to impart information, not to assess. Everything that's blue is to assess. That uses auto-graded technology. There's no such thing as open-ended questions in a learning tree. It doesn't make sense. So the first exposition node they have is called a strategy map, and it's basically said, you got this question wrong. These are the skills that you need in order to be able to master it. Where do you want to go? The idea behind here is that this is a passive adaptive learning infrastructure. Students evolve on this learning tree based off of what they want, not based off of what we think that they need. So this means students need to start to hone metacognition skills in order to ask what do they know and what they don't know. And metacognition skills are actually notoriously difficult in order to teach. And the students can come in and say, well, I don't think I know significant figures with performing multiplications. I want to see a text in order to explain it. Or I don't think I know this. I want to see video in order to explain it. Or I need to know more about rounding because that's an issue that I have that's necessary for this question. Or I just want a series of questions in order to scaffold and let me learn by doing and not by being told. It's up to the student to decide how they want to go, what works with their preference, their modality. The key point is if they go through here from the top to the bottom, they then get a do-over, a extra life in a video game. They can come back up here and do this question again. It's ideally algorithmic, so it changes its numbers. And they can then decide if they plug it in and if they are able to be successful. We've just demonstrated learning. We got a pre and a post, and we got learning, whereas everything else that we've done is based off of performance. Doesn't teach learning, doesn't evaluate learning. If they got that wrong, what do? They get the opportunity in order to go into the tree again in order to relearn. It helps to develop metacognition. It makes this into an engaged environment. Instead of spoon feeding students problem after problem, let them to be involved in their education. And almost invariably, if students are more engaged and involved in their education, they tend to learn better. And that's the concept of the learning tree. But you can break these things up into a lot of different things. For example, if I'm teaching something with pH, I invariably have a couple branches here saying, do you know logarithms? Because that's a critical component in terms of being able to do pH issues. So you can start to expand this into a much broader scope of things or topics in order to be able to master it. So it's a more powerful approach in order to get than just here is the solution for your problem and moving forward. The thing is, making a learning tree can be complicated because you have to have bits and pieces. You can use this assessment, but you need to make this exposition node and bring it together, and then you're constantly honing it based off of what you think it is. But the idea behind this is essentially give the students a little bit of their connectivity map for their course, which I've never been able to figure out how to do and how to teach with, and let them see little bits and pieces of how things are connected in terms of moving forward, which again, we oftentimes fail in order to be able to instill into our students because of this advance this question, advance this question, advance this question approach off of that. Anyways, I said I was going to talk about this for only 5 minutes. I'm happy in order to go over this in more detail in the breakout room. I think it's very important, very exciting. It just takes a bit of work in order to be able to do. We have about 500 learning trees that are public that you can grab and run with, and you're able to make your own learning trees right now. And so we have a skill in order to be able to master.